In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, peace and blessings be upon the messenger of Allah. Today I wanted to tell you an amazing story about the Dajjal. It is known that the emergence of the Dajjal is one of the major signs of the Day of Judgment, and his appearance will come in the last days of humanity. However, this story took place many centuries ago, even in the time of the Prophet, may Allah bless him and grant him peace. This story is remarkable, for only a few dozen people were able to witness it. It is narrated that on that day, 31 people saw the Dajjal, one of whom later told the Prophet about him. There is only one riwayat that tells us about a real encounter with the Dajjal himself, and the main character of this story is a companion by the name of Tamim ibn Aus ad-Dari. Tamim was from the Dar tribe, belonging to the Lakham clan. He was one of the monks of Palestine. At the time of his encounter with the Dajjal, he was still a Christian. Sometime later, when Tamim accepted Islam, he told the Messenger of Allah, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, about this encounter. This story is truly remarkable. It is narrated by Imam Muslim in his collection from Fatima bint Qais, may Allah be pleased with her. Fatima is a very well-known female companion. She was one of the first muhajirun. The hadith of Fatima is very long, and only at its end is this story about Tamim ad-Dari mentioned. The story begins thus. When the Messenger of Allah finished the prayer, he sat upon the minbar. One day the Prophet, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, greatly delayed the time of the night prayer. Coming out to the people, he explained this by saying that he had been speaking for a long time with Tamim ad-Dari on a very important matter. Tamim had arrived in Medina that day and headed straight to the Prophet, who received him at his home. The topic of conversation greatly interested the Prophet, which is why they did not come out for prayer for a long time, while the people were waiting for them and beginning to worry. When the Prophet came out and led the congregational prayer, he addressed the people with the words, "Truly, by Allah, I did not gather you together to admonish you or to warn you of anything, but I called you here because of Tamim ad-Dari, a Christian who accepted Islam, gave the oath of allegiance, and told me the same thing that I was telling you about the Masih ad-Dajjal." Thus the Prophet, having finished the prayer, stood upon the minbar and, as mentioned in one of the narrations, smiled upon seeing the anxious companions. When they asked him about the reason for such a late coming out to prayer, he told them the story of Tamim ad-Dari. The Prophet, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, said, Tamim told me that once he sailed on a ship together with 30 men. One of the remarkable aspects of this narration is the fact that the Prophet is conveying it to us from another person. We are all accustomed to people narrating from the Prophet, but not him from them. Therefore, it is remarkable when, for example, an elder narrates from a younger person, or when a leader narrates from his followers. We also see here that the Prophet accepts a narration from one single person, which indicates the validity of accepting a khabar ahad, a single narrator report. So the Prophet told that Tamim was sailing on a ship upon the sea. This excludes the possibility that they were sailing on a river or traveling on land, for the Arabs also call camels ships of the land. They were sailing on the sea, and along with Tamim on the ship were 30 men from the clans of Lakham and Juzam. In another narration, it is stated that these were 30 men from Palestine. In the continuation of the hadith, it says, the waves tossed them about for a month. Storms like these usually occur in the Red Sea. Earlier I thought that perhaps this referred to the Mediterranean Sea, because at the end of the story, the Prophet speaks of the sea in the Sham, Levant region. People living to the north of the Red Sea call it the Sea in Sham, while people living on the southern side call it the Yemeni Sea. Moreover, the Red Sea was closer to them, for they headed east after this encounter. The waves tossed them about for a month. For a whole month the storm did not subside, and the waves carried them in a direction unknown to them. Therefore they could not say where they were sailing, or where that island was located upon which they encountered the Dajjal. Then they were cast upon some island in the sea at sunset. They got into small boats and set off for the island. It turns out that it was difficult to approach this island by ship. Therefore, they used small boats to reach the island. On the island, they were met by an extraordinary animal, which, as the hadith states, had very thick and dense fur. It covered the animal in such a way that people could not distinguish where its front part was and where its back was. Seeing such a remarkable animal, they asked, "Woe to you! What are you?" Apparently, they could not even understand whether it was a human or an animal, or some other creature, since they addressed it with a question. The animal spoke and answered the question. I am the Jassasa. Jassasa is derived from the Arabic verb jassa, meaning to scout, to spy out. From this we understand that either it was gathering news for the Dajjal, or, as some scholars believed, it was that animal which, before the Day of Judgment, will come out to the people and say who is a believer and who is an unbeliever. The travelers asked, "And what is the Jasasa?" The creature did not answer, but merely directed them to a Christian temple. In another narration, however, it is said that it directed them to a palace, saying, "O people, go to that man, for he wants to know about you." Or it said, "He very much wants to talk with you." Tamim ad-Dari, may Allah be pleased with him, said, "When it named this man to us, we were frightened, fearing that the animal might be a shaitan." Then Tamim said, "We quickly headed to the monastery and entered it. Bear in mind that it was nighttime, which intensified their fear of the unprecedented creature. They hurried to the monastery, to which the creature had directed them, and there they saw a very tall, powerfully built man. In this hadith, the Dajjal is described as Azamu Insan, meaning the greatest person. This can mean that he was physically large and tall, or that the Dajjal was fearsome and inspired dread in people." Tamim continues, "The hands of this man were tied to his neck, and his legs from the knees to the ankles were shackled in iron chains. This is how they found the Dajjal. In well-known hadiths, it is also narrated that the Dajjal is blind, while in another, it is stated that he is awar, which can be translated either as blind in one eye or as having a defect. If we take the second variant of the translation, then this means that both of his eyes have defects. However, regardless of that, the Dajjal can see, that is, he is not blind in both eyes. The travelers asked, "Woe to you, what are you?" Here they use the Arabic pronoun ma, which is applied to inanimate objects or unreasoning creatures. This means that the Dajjal had such a strange appearance that they could not even understand whether there was a human before them. The Dajjal answered them, "Soon you will learn who I am. Tell me about yourselves." In another narration, it is said that he answered, "First you tell me who you are, and then I will tell you about myself." Here the Dajjal also used the pronoun ma, since he was not asking about their names. He was more interested in what they represented and what they did. Then they began to tell of what had happened to them, how they had seen the creature named Jasasa, which had directed them to the monastery. Then he began to ask them about certain events, which would become omens of his appearance. The Dajjal said to them, "Tell me about the date palms of Baisan." Baisan is a city in eastern Palestine. The people asked, "What exactly do you want to know about them?" He said, "I am asking you about the fruits. Do they bear fruit?" They answered him, "Yes," possibly because he himself was from Palestine. He was asking about events specifically in Palestine and Sham. In this way, Allah willed that the Dajjal himself would tell people about those events, which would become signs of his emergence, so that people would be ready for those terrible days. So the Dajjal asked about the date palms of Baisan, whether they still bear fruit. The people answered that these palms do bear fruit, to which the Dajjal said, "Soon they will stop bearing fruit." This account shows us that a portent of the Dajjal's emergence will be the stripping of the earth's blessing. From other hadiths, we also learn that before the emergence of the Dajjal, there will be hard days of drought and famine. Then he asked, "Tell me about the Lake of Tiberias." This lake is also located in Palestine, approximately 40 kilometers to the north of the city of Baisan. The people asked, "What exactly do you want to know about it?" He said, "Is there water in it?" They answered him, "Yes, there is a lot of water in it." He said, "Soon it will dry up, and the water will disappear." Then he said, "Tell me about the spring of Zugar." Zugar is also one of the cities of Palestine, or of Jordan. Zugar was one of the cities of the people of Lut, which is now located not far from the Dead Sea. The people asked, "What exactly do you want to know about it?" The Dajjal said, "Is there water in this spring? Do people use the water of the spring for irrigation?" The people answered him, "Yes, there is a lot of water in it, and people use its water for irrigation." Here it was expected that the Dajjal would say that the water in this spring would soon run dry. However, he jumped straight to a more important question. He asked, "Tell me about the prophet of the unlettered and what he has done." He was asking about the prophet Muhammad. May Allah bless him and grant him peace. Here I want to draw your attention to the fact that the first questions concern the lands of Palestine or Sham. So the Dajjal asked, "Tell me about the prophet of the unlettered and what he has done." The unlettered, these are the Arabs of that time, who knew neither how to write nor how to read. By describing the prophet in this way, the Dajjal wanted to humiliate him, just as the Israelites, who called the Arabs unlettered. Their words are cited in the Quran. "There is no sin upon us to deceive an ignorant one, an Arab." Here the connection of the Dajjal with the Jews is quite clear. for, as stated in the Hadith, the Jews of Asbahan will follow the Dajjal. However, one must know that in the Quran the description of the Prophet, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, as unlettered, comes as a form of praise. He sent to the unlettered, Arabs who could not read and write, a messenger from among them, an Arab like them. He recites to them His, Almighty Allah's, ayat, purifies them, and teaches them the great book, the Quran, and wisdom, though before they were in manifest error. The Arabs were unlettered, but after accepting Islam, they began to learn literacy, to seek knowledge. Therefore, Allah mentions their former condition, and then shows what they became after Islam. The travelers answered the Dajjal. He left Mecca and settled in Yathrib. This is in the Riwayat of Muslim. As for the Riwayat in the collection of Imam Tirmidhi, it states there, and he, the Prophet, left Mecca so swiftly that he skillfully eluded the enemies. The Dajjal asked, "Are the Arabs waging war against him?" The people answered, "Yes." He asked, "How did he deal with them?" And they told him that the Prophet had gained the upper hand over the Arabs living nearby, and they followed him. All these words indicate that this encounter with the Dajjal took place after the conquest of Mecca, that is, 8 years after the Hijrah, or even at the beginning of the 9th year of the Hijrah, when the Arabs began to accept Islam in multitudes. It is known that Tamim ad-Dari came to the Prophet in the 9th year of the Hijrah. Therefore, most likely the encounter with the Dajjal also took place in the 8th year, or at the beginning of the 9th year of the Hijrah. Here it should also be noted that at the time of Tamim's encounter with the Dajjal, the Prophet had already been calling to Islam for approximately 20 years, and the Dajjal did not properly know what was happening with him. This means that Allah granted the Dajjal knowledge of only limited information about the Prophet and about the events that were happening at that time. The Dajjal asked the travelers, "Did everything happen exactly as you say?" They answered, "Yes." He said, "Truly, it is better for them to follow him." It is remarkable that these words are spoken by the Dajjal, for he is one of the main enemies of Islam and the Muslims. Therefore, one can presume that either he said these words out of envy, or Allah compelled him to say this, in order to instill in the hearts of Tamim and his companions respect for the Prophet and the religion of Islam. For it is known that after this encounter, Tamim returned to his native city, after which he set off in a group of 10 people to Medina and pledged allegiance to the Prophet in Islam. In another authentic version of this hadith, the Dajjal asked the people, "Has the Prophet conquered Persia?" The people answered, "No, this has not happened." The Dajjal said, "Soon he will conquer these lands." And, as is known, subsequently the caliphs of the Prophet, Abu Bakr and Umar, would conquer the lands of the Persians. Then the Dajjal began to tell about himself. "I will tell you about myself. I am al-Masih ad-Dajjal, and truly, I will soon appear when I am permitted to leave this place. I will come out, and I will walk across the earth. In 40 nights I will pass through every settlement, except Mecca and Medina, for these 2 cities will be protected from me. Every time I try to enter one of them, I will be met by an angel in whose right hand there will be a drawn sword, and he will not allow me to enter. There will be angels who will guard every passage leading to them, that is, to Mecca and Medina." Then Fatima bint Qais, who narrated this hadith, told of the Prophet sitting upon the minbar. The Messenger of Allah, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, then said to us, striking his staff upon the minbar, "This is Taiba, that is, Medina. This is Taiba. This is Taiba. Did I tell you something similar before? That is, did I tell you everything that Tamim ad-Dari has now told me?" The people answered, "Yes." The Prophet continued, "Truly, I am pleased with what Tamim has told. Truly, this is consistent with what I told you about the Dajjal in the Sea of Sham, or in the Yemeni Sea. No, on the contrary, he will appear from the east. He will appear from the east. He will appear from the east," pointing, at that moment, with his hand to the east. At first the Prophet, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, told the people that the Dajjal would emerge from the Red Sea, either from the side of Sham or from the side of Yemen. However, then Allah sent down revelation to the Prophet, stating that the Dajjal would emerge from the east, and not from the Red Sea, which is why the Prophet placed such strong emphasis on this, repeating it 3 times. In other hadiths, the Prophet, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, pointing his hand toward the east, said that tribulations, fitna, would come from that very direction. And one of the greatest tribulations is the tribulation of the Dajjal. This is narrated, for example, in the hadith transmitted by Abdullah ibn Umar, in which the Prophet pointed his hand to the east and said that tribulations would come from the east. Also from the traditions, it is known to us that the first appearance of the Dajjal will be in Khorasan, This is a historical region located in eastern Iran and the western part of Afghanistan, and this appearance will be shortly before the Day of Judgment, with the permission of Almighty Allah. Such was the dialogue that took place between Tamim ad-Dari and the Dajjal, and the authenticity of everything that this companion narrated was confirmed by the Messenger of Allah himself, standing upon the minbar. Therefore, there is no doubt that all these events will come to pass.